Thanks for tuning into TellyCast. Before you listen to the show, I wanted to let you know about our next content industry event, the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. It takes place at BFI South Bank in London on the 30th of November. The first event of its kind in the UK, it will create an environment for producers, podcasters, brands, media agencies, platforms and the wider content industry to gather, learn, debate and share insight on the business opportunities in the fast-developing world of digital-first content. Panel sessions during the day are designed to provide actionable insights and will focus on production, development, community building, IP, formats and brand-funded social content. Speakers include senior execs from Meta, BBC Studios, Lad Bible Group, Channel 4, Future Studios, Audio Boom, The Sidemen, Jungle Creations and more to be announced. The lineup also features top creators, including YouTube star Joe Sugg and Danny Robbins, creator of podcast-turned-TV series The Battersea Poltergeist. And our moderators include Creatorville's Sam Barcroft and former YouTube Originals Commissioner and Executive Producer Luke Hyams. Tickets are strictly limited and only available at telecast.com/events. TellyCast listeners can also get an extra £20 off the ticket price by using the promo code TellyCast+. We'll see you there.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. On this week's show, my guest is Aaqil Ahmed, former BBC and Channel 4 Commissioner and diversity expert, as we talk religion and diversity in TV. It's coming right up on this week's TellyCast. Welcome to the show, Aaqil.
Thanks for having me on.
Great to chat with you. Thanks for taking the time out for a bit of a chin wag. It's lovely to be able to have a chat with you. So what we tend to do on the show, everybody I chat to on TellyCast, we have a quick conversation about, how you got to where you currently are in your career, a little bit about your career journey. So I gather that it's about 30 years since you left uni. So talk us through your journey and how you got to your position that you're in now.
I graduated in 1992. But so my journey is obviously, born in Wigan, of all places, which you'll know very well being from Leeds and understanding that Wigan is the kings of rugby league. But obviously, growing up in Wigan, Manchester, Bolton, all around there, I ended up actually going to art school and wanted to become a graphic designer. And I think after 2 years at art school, we were shown these Apple Macintosh computers. And at that point, we realised, bloody hell, we just spent 2 years learning how to do it all by hand. And it can all be done on a computer in about 5 seconds. So I got a job as a cut and paste artist, which is like cutting and pasting, as you see on the computer now. But that's what we did in real life. And studied in Batley, Dewsbury Art College, Batley Art College in Dewsbury, in West Yorkshire. And discovered photography, film, and then ended up applying to go to university, it was Polytechnic Central London, to study photography, film and video. And got in and got a degree, in photography, film and video, graduated from the University of Westminster in my last year. And during that period, because I came from a family that had absolutely no idea about the industry and, my mum and my dad drove to this country, I just I had to learn about it. And so basically I did lots and lots of work experiences, whether it be for Channel 4 production companies, for the BBC, making pop videos, even filming people's graduation ceremonies as part of some company. Anything I could do. I got offered a master's in journalism, but I also got offered a 2-month contract by the BBC. And I took the 2-month contract in summer of 1992. And I've been here ever since. So the big thing that I did was I studied, photography, film, video, etc. But it was the work experiences. I was constantly working for people, a week here, 2 weeks there, 1 day here, you name it. I would do everything because I knew that when I hit that job market, I didn't have anything to rely. I didn't have a family or a middle class background or all those kind of family in the industry. And I'd seen around me that even the people I was studying with and the people I was working with were very different to me. So I had to stand out. And that's what I just tried to do.
on-the-job work experience to you was absolutely crucial. And
Totally.
we're going back 25 to 30 years, as you said.
Yeah.
The TV industry was, in the UK, was perhaps a bit of a different type of industry than it is now. There's a lot of favours being done, I think.
We also had a closed shop as well, You had a closed shop. You had to have a union ticket. And that union ticket, let's be honest, wasn't all about people like me. For the first kind of like few jobs that I had before I graduated, a lot of them were cash in hand because they couldn't give me a proper job because the fact of the matter was that I didn't have a union ticket in those days. And it was actually only when that monopoly of actually being a union member was broken that it enabled people like myself then to just get a job, and for it not to be dictated and controlled by people who effectively therefore controlled what the workforce would be.
We're seeing the resurgence of union power coming back, and that's probably a different topic.
There are two things between union power and a closed shop, right? That's the thing. There's a thing about, collective bargaining, all of that, did A-level politics before I went to art school. I get that. It's more about the whole thing about, who can and can't come into the industry. And that's why there's a whole generation of us who were the first British Asian types to come in. We're all in our mid to late 50s now, whatever, onwards. But these were the first people who basically broke through. And the reason why was because we were able to break through. It was hard initially, but the floodgates opened once it was anybody could get a job. And then it was simply based on your ability rather than whether or not you could get access to getting a union ticket.
Yeah. But there's also, when it comes to the BBC and all different parts of the TV industry, I mean, we also see a lot of friends of friends getting access to jobs and sort of old school tie aspect of the way that people got into the industry. I mean,
it hasn't gone away, though.
It's still the case a little bit.
It hasn't gone away. I mean, it's still there. Nothing's the same, obviously. Everywhere is different in that respect. But there's a lot of it. I would say now the difference is not so much that, you've got the job because your dad or your mum or your uncle or whatever, or your godfather parent, whatever, although there's a lot of that. People get jobs now because they're very similar to the people that maybe are hiring them. Yeah. And I think that in terms of thinking, in terms of their approach or where they live or who they're married to or where they studied and all of these kind of things, that it creates a monocultural thinking. I'm not talking here now when I say culturally that everybody's white or whatever. I'm just saying the thinking, the process behind it, the where people live, how they sound, what they believe in, where they shop, where they go to this, they're married, and they got all their friends who are married to each other. All of these kind of things actually are what create a workforce, particularly at the top of the tree, where it's very, very similar. And I think how that has been created might have changed, but it's effectively created, once again, a strata of people who are very, very similar.
Did you find, coming from an Asian background and a Northern background as well, do you feel that you had to work harder to progress at the same pace as perhaps other people in the industry, your colleagues at that point? Did you have to work harder than them to make the same sort of progress?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I probably had to work a lot harder to get in, if I'm honest. But no, I don't. I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are certain times in your career when you think, that's really unfair, isn't it? And I think I wouldn't say that I've had to work harder. When I was going from a researcher to assistant producer to PD, whatever, it was all based on what ideas you had, I found. If your ideas were good and if you had people around you that listened to those ideas and you delivered on them, then you got jobs, you got work. I mean, I got promoted and got jobs because the programs I was making were often ideas that I came up with. And I think if you're an ideas person, it can be a lot easier. Don't think that I've had to work harder simply because I'm an Asian. I think some of us have to work harder because of a number of factors. And I think that, the colour of my skin might be one thing, but I think for some people that being a Northerner, having the accent, there's great accents that we have, mate, having these accents, coming from a migrant or working class type background, or not going to the right university, or not studying the right kind of, I could go on. All of these things can be a kind of like a roadblocker, and you've got to figure out how you get around that roadblock. But what I would say is, I think in the latter stages of being as a commissioner and things like that, there were times when I thought, had I not been who I was, I think there'd have been a lot more kind of kudos for some of the things that maybe I did. as opposed to, the reaction often was kind of like shrugging of the shoulders, think, yeah, you try and do it, but then, so there may be more a perception sometimes that people think, oh, you only delivered something like this because of your ethnic background, as opposed to, no, I delivered this because other ethnics haven't delivered it. Why did I deliver it? Because I had the ability to. So I think it's very complicated rather than being able to just simply say, oh, I've been held back because of my colour of my skin or my religious background or whatever. I think there's so many different factors that are helpful at times and also roadblockers at times. And all I've tried to do, like many, many people in many industries, particularly in TV, is think, how do I get around that roadblock? What do I have to do to get around it? And sometimes it can be you, and sometimes it can be just acquiring a skill set that will enable you to deliver.
Just going back to the early points of your career, you were deputy editor, an acting editor in Specialist Factual at the BBC. And that was probably your first coming into sort of more senior positions when you were there. You've obviously worked within religion and diversity type programming all of your career from that point.
Yeah, most of it, yeah.
And was religion key to your first role in TV, or were you generally approaching a wide range of content and you specialised in that once you were in the BBC?
I mean, many people think that I've got a degree in theology and all that kind of stuff, but actually I haven't. I fell into it in that sense. Now, I made lots of different programmes. I used to work for what was initially known as the Multicultural Programming Department of the BBC, and we made programmes for the Asian community, for the African Caribbean community at that time. And it was basically, I worked on anything from entertainment shows to current affairs shows. And obviously had things like attachments to Panorama and all those kind of things. So I worked in more factual kind of programming, but also produced 4 series of a quiz show on Bollywood cinema. I made lots of LE type, shiny floor type shows. So religion wasn't something I had in mind. And then after leaving multicultural programming, I worked for network news and current affairs. Anything from shows like Here and Now, which was, 7:30 on BBC One, working on big national news stories like the Diana's funeral or, Turkish earthquake or whatever. I did all those kind of things. And it was when the BBC wanted to do a big season on Islam around about 2000. It went out in 2001, but around about in 2000, I was just approached and asked, would I be interested in being involved in it? And they made me the deputy editor of the season. And about a couple of weeks after we'd had about 14 programs and 300 community events and books and magazines and all sorts of stuff, everything from a Jules Holland music special through to a documentary on a year in the life of a Muslim football team called They Think It's All Islam, we called it, through to, the first ever pilgrimage to Mecca, all these kind of things. 2 weeks later, 9/11 happened. And by then, I was actually back in current affairs. But then it was decided to share me for a little while between current affairs and religion, Specialist Factual. And then I ended up working, as you quite rightly say, in the world of religion and multicultural programming and a very diverse range of programming in that sense, primarily in that area ever since. And kind of like the world changed that day. I suppose I was in the right place at the right time, but also had that skill set, if you think about it, all those years in current affairs, all those years working in kind of like multicultural programming, to then put that into use into a changing world of religion, where up to that point, religion had really primarily been in this country Christianity. And 9/11 onwards, I would argue it should have been well before that, but definitely from 9/11 onwards, the world had changed to the extent that we needed programming that would reflect the world that we were suddenly in. And my background seemed to fit it. And the programs that I made, like, the first interviews with the suicide bombers and Palestinian suicide bombers and all that kind of stuff, it spoke to a yearning for knowledge that nobody was delivering at the time. That's all. And so there was a whole gang of us that basically just got the chance to make programs, whether it's for the BBC or Channel 4, that weren't being made, and the world was crying out for them.
And when it comes to the change in demand for programming after 9/11, how did that change?
People often said to me in the early days, they'd say things like, oh, it must have made your life a lot easier, work, with the idea. And no. So I remember on September the 12th, actually, I stood in Euston Station having to speak to some very senior people at the BBC to explain to them what was going on the phone, because there was a big meeting and there was a lack of knowledge. But the stuff that we did after that and the stuff that we did, there wasn't a sudden raft of kind of programs about about terrorism and 9/11. And when I joined Channel 4, in 2003. So you're about a year and a half to 2 years after 9/11, right? And I inherited a slate of programs about some guy who was in Siberia who thought he was reincarnation of Jesus. So there was a documentary about evangelical Christians competing at the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. I mean, we weren't seeing programs about terrorism and conflict. That was the stuff that we started making then. So it wasn't that everybody was suddenly making these programs. They weren't. It was actually, we had to start making them a year or two later. There was a few that were made, obviously, about the aftermath and the kind of impact, but the kind of things where the cult of the suicide bomber, or Inside the Mind of the Suicide Bomber, or Children of Abraham, all these kind of like programs which really tried to see big, long running series, which tried to get under the skin and understand the evolution of the ideology, or the evolution of the techniques, or all of these kind of things. That happened a couple of years later. So just because 9/11 happened doesn't actually mean that suddenly there were all these particular films. There were lots of films, yes, about 9/11, but there weren't films about why people would do things that they did, what that history or ideology or chronology and all those kind of things may have been about. That came afterwards.
And that was obviously really key, because I think that it just threw all of these issues into the public arena that many people in the UK and further afield hadn't really considered. We're not aware about how various different religions, in particular Islam, was thinking about what was going on in the world, and particular issues. And I'm looking at the programs that you commissioned as commissioning editor, religion, and head of multicultural programming for Channel 4. Lots of award-winning projects here, Aaqil. Emmy and Grierson nominated Cult of the Suicide Bomber, you mentioned, BAFTA winner, an Emmy winner for Dispatches, and a BAMF winning film on what is the Quran, for example, and lots of different things. I'm not going to go through everything. You've obviously, it's really impressive list.
But none of them for religion, if that makes any sense, right? These are all current affairs and documentary or factual type winning programs, as opposed to, there's no category for religion.
Yes, yeah. What was the key then to telling these stories and exploring these different stories?
No, it's a really good question.
It's a very sensitive, area. And if you're doing a documentary on the Quran, for example, it's the authenticity and the accuracy of what you're doing is absolutely key. I mean, what's the secret?
No, it's a really good question. This, we could spend about a whole session on this point. But basically, the intro to this was, I looked at research. I had some ideas anyway, but I was looking at research, and it was actually history viewers' research. And they talked about particular kind of other subgenres and what would make them go to those kind of like genres. And there was something about religion where they said, if it explained the world we live in today, that would be something they would go to. And that's the kind of mantra that I had for a number of years, and which is why I think, not everybody has that, but it was what I believed in my vision, which was, we see things on the news, and there's a certain audience will watch Newsnight or Channel 4 News or whatever, or may watch a Dispatches or etc. But the wider public doesn't know what's going on. They don't know the backstory, because the news item can be 30 seconds to 3 minutes, right? It's not going to be any longer than that. So we need to understand the rationale behind why things may happen. So that was the key towards doing these things. And then once you start doing it, you become more confident. Producers they're not, because none of us are stupid. They start looking at this and thinking, this guy he might buy this idea, and they'll come to you. And then obviously the broadcaster as well, at Channel 4 in particular, because nobody else was making these kind of programs at the time. At Channel 4 in particular, Kevin Ligo, who was my boss at the time, and Janice Hadlow, who was my boss as well, they really championed it. But particularly Kevin, he really wanted this stuff. He used to tease me a little bit in that Kevin Ligo kind of way about how ironic it was that whenever I would do a series on suicide bombing or terrorism, whatever, there'd be like an outrageous terrorist attack just before transmission. And that was his idea of lightening the conversation half the time. But he's right. These were good subjects that needed to be explored. And then when you start delving into them, people often turn around to me and say, "Oh, you can't talk about these things. It's very difficult, or you can't talk about Islam." Well, with the Quran and the life of Muhammad at the BBC, we had some very big things were said, particularly in the Quran. Talk about the authenticity. Is it read in the right language? Does it have a different meaning? Did Muhammad exist in the first place? Is Muhammad a paedophile? Or, was his relations with other minorities show him to be an anti-Semite? Or we looked at all of these topics, and you know what? No complaints. In other words, you can do something as long as, and I believe this is my take on this, is one, if you approach it from the point of view of, this is a complicated subject and we're going to tell it properly, as opposed to, it's my right to offend you, so therefore I'm going to offend you, which is what quite a few program makers think, which is not the way to do it, because then you've already got people upset before you've even said anything. And if you actually realize that this is complicated, so let's tell it in the best way that we can. And the best example I can give on that to any kind of filmmaker is when we were doing the Quran, and I learned so much from that process. And I also, because we were working with the film, it was a great team. The director, the person who was making it was Anthony Thomas, who's one of the legends of documentary filmmaking. And he's just got a book out now about his life, and I'd recommend people read Anthony's book. And then the exec was Samir Shah, who, again, has forgotten a lot that many people will not know about how to make TV programs. And then you just threw me into that mix, and some great lawyers from Channel 4 as well. And it kind of happened. But I remember the first viewing, and we were talking about the authenticity of the Quran. And I was watching it, and I showed it to somebody who turned around and said, people are going to be really upset about this because it's come out of nowhere. And I said, no, well, everyone knows this. He goes, no. You may know it, but not everybody knows this stuff. And so I thought about it. And then the next day, went into the edit suite, spoke to Anthony and the team and said, we need to flag up that some big stuff is coming earlier so that we keep flagging it so you're not taken by surprise. And then I actually think we're trying to get through this as quickly as possible because we're terrified of getting it wrong. So what we need to do, though, is to slow it down, have pauses, like as if you're making a speech, and basically spend double the time on it, have more voices in there, fully get through this, and it will feel better because I've shown it to a couple of people who I trust their judgment, and they have all said the same thing, which was, where did this come from? I wasn't expecting this. I didn't know it was going to be like this. And then you just rush through it. I haven't had time to think about it. You're on to the next thing. And you know what? It really worked. And so that's my thing that I've always said, which is you can approach any subject you want to approach. The question is how you approach it, why you approach it, and what you expect to come out of it. I do not believe for 1 second that there is no subject which is taboo, because you know what? Not only myself, but many other people have covered lots of subjects which were told are taboo. It's only the people who keep telling us that something is taboo, right? Actually, you can cover it. You just got to know how and why you do it. And one of the last things I did when I was at the BBC was obviously we showed the when the Charlie Hebdo shootings happened. I remember being called into the newsroom by Fran Unsworth, and at the time, who I think was the deputy head of news at the time, and James Harding and all those people. And we spent a lot of time talking about should we not. And you know what? We did show the cartoons. I think we were the only publisher or broadcaster in the UK to do it. And again, no complaints because we handled it in the correct manner. There were certain things that we did, certain things that we didn't do. Then, I helped David Jordan, editorial policy, come up with all sorts of rules and regulations about how and when you can show these. The fact of the matter is, people will say you can't do something. What we've proved with the Quran or the life of Muhammad or Inside the Mind of a Suicide Bomber or the Charlie Hebdo cartoon or whatever is actually everything's possible. It's just why you do it and how you do it.
You talk about the Charlie Hebdo cartoons and you start to get into, ethics and...
Yeah. I was the head of ethics as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that you were head of religion and ethics at the BBC, which you moved on to after Channel 4. What did you find to be the greatest challenge in that role? Because that's a big role, right? I mean, that's a...
Yeah. I did it for 9 years. And what you need to remember is that I wasn't just so I commissioned all the television. I ran in-house television and radio production. I was the head of religion. And then there were other people who didn't work for me, but across the BBC, who, you were kind of like an editorial lead or linked to. And then there was all the external issues as well with regards to religion. So actually dealing with all the stakeholders, whether it be, Church of England or Muslim Council of Britain or MPs, government, other agencies, etc. That role didn't exist before and hasn't existed since. I think I replaced about 4 or 5 people, and I think I was replaced by about 4 or 5 people as well. So I did that all on my own. The biggest challenge was obviously making sure that was, again, a little bit like with Channel 4, was taking the programming from the fringes of the schedule and trying to get it into prime time. When I went to Channel 4, the documentaries were going out at 5 o'clock or 5:30 on a Saturday. And if you remember the kind of the kind of programs I was telling you about post 9/11, no disrespect to the films, they were very good films. But the thing is, they didn't scream that this must be in the heart of the schedule. Getting into 9 or 8 p.m. was how you get this, you get the backing of the channel. It had to do the same thing with the BBC, whether it be on 2, 1, or much more successful on 2 and 4. More successful with regards to BBC, with reshaping some of the kind of festival religion output for BBC One. And the big thing for me was, we're living in a society with really poor religious literacy. We've lived in I could really get academic and start talking about, we've been living in a post-Christian Europe for most of the 20th century onwards. But, the rest of the world is quite religious. And because of migration, because of digital technology, etc., the rest of the world is with us now. And we see religion back in the public space. We see communities and groups who have a different perception and relationship with religiosity than what the mainstream might have. And if you don't have that reflected in the decision making of any particular kind of broadcaster or institution, then what can happen is that decisions can get made which effectively are based on what they think is the reality. And if you're all talking to each other and you all think in the same kind of way, then you don't understand what the real reality is. And this is something we may pick on later on, but end of November is when we will find out about the census figures in the UK, about what the number of people are who are living in this country, etc., from different kind of ethnic groups. It could be 4 to 5 million Muslims, for instance, right? This is not me speaking. This is what Muslim groups might say, is at what point does 4 to 5 million people constitute a program of its own if you're paying for a license fee, if you're a true public service broadcaster? But if you're working in a world where you're downgrading religion, because actually I think that's what we've seen across the whole spectrum of broadcasters, not just one, but across the whole spectrum. If you've seen changes to what it was like a few years ago, and then they say, oh, that's because people aren't as religious now. Well, all the data is telling us that's actually incorrect, because the established vision of what you think was religion and religious communities may be dying. But even within Christianity, you've got, because of migration from Eastern Europe or Latin America or Africa or whatever, you've got growth in Catholicism, in Pentecostal Christianity, because of the migration from India. We're going to have a lot more Hindu people living in this country than we've had before. And the census figures will tell us that. The Muslim community in certain geographical pockets is the majority rather than a minority. Now, all of this, religion is a key part to a lot of these people. So downgrading it is, one, not reflecting people today, but it's suicide as those numbers grow going forward. So the biggest challenge for me has been then and still now is trying to convince people you've got to get out of your own comfort zone and realize that this means more to a lot of people than you think it does, because you've surrounded yourself maybe with people who think like you, and your own prejudices are stopping you from realizing that understanding this territory may be more important to a lot more of the audience than ignoring it. Because by ignoring it, then they will turn around and say, well, you don't do anything for me, so why should I pay you any money? And I think trying to get that across to people has been and is quite a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I can imagine. I hadn't really considered that myself.
Well, I've been out license fee collecting in the days when I was, an exec at the BBC. I'm not sure everybody has, but I did quite a few times. And I remember speaking to Eastern Europeans who actually, it was really hilarious. They were called us the Stasi, which I found quite funny. But I've had to explain to them and say, look, just because you're not watching the BBC, for instance, doesn't mean that you don't have a license fee. The license fee doesn't pay for the BBC, effectively. It's supposed to pay for your ability to be able to watch live transmitted programming, which is what you're doing. So you're breaking the law, you need a license. They couldn't get their head around that. Then we spoke to I remember in my broken Arabic, speaking to an Iraqi family who didn't have a license and explaining to them that just because you're watching satellite stuff from Iraq, other Middle Eastern broadcasters, you still need to have a license fee. At what point do those people turn around and say, well, why? Why should I? if you don't do anything for me, and we are millions strong now, then why would I bother having a license fee? And that's the same for all public service broadcasting. There is a business case for all of this. It's not just simply a kind of like it's the right thing to do. There's a business case, because actually you make yourself irrelevant going forward in a world where we have much, much more hyper diversity in the UK than we've ever experienced before.
On that point, I mean, you're a published author as well, aren't you? And you wrote a book on the future of public service broadcasting.
Well, I wrote a chapter. I wrote a chapter in the book, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of other work that you've had published as well. I mean, and this could be its own show, I'm sure, a discussion about that. But
I'll come on again, Justin, mate, anytime you want. We can maybe have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we will.
But you know what was interesting about that point, though? That chapter. I wrote that in it was actually only published in Scandinavia. That says a lot about me. I've never been teased about that. I actually wrote it when I was at Channel 4, and they thought it was funny that it only got published in Scandinavia. And at the time, it was pre-social media. Yeah, and I was making the point that is true public service broadcasting possible if you have a consensus on what is right and wrong, i.e. if you have a liberal consensus that this is what people should think, then is that true public service broadcasting? What about the people who are more to the right? Or what about people who are bigoted or whatever? I mean, I'm not saying that. Do they have the right to some equal public service broadcasting as somebody who complies with that kind of liberal consensus on diversity, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, you name it? And I was asking the question, the reason why I'm saying this is because if we don't reflect all true voices, then where do those people go? Where will they go? They have to go somewhere, because ultimately they are confused about the fact that they are not treated equally. Well, we know where they went in the end, because social media came along and gave them the opportunity to basically to talk to themselves, to be in silos, because of the kind of the way the metadata and all of those kind of things work, that they basically just talk to themselves now. They don't know what else is happening around them. And of course, technology was always going to come along, and that was always going to happen. But the point I was making all those years ago was, if we don't treat everybody as not necessarily equally, but give them the ability not to be ridiculed for their belief structure in some form or other, and give them access to the airways in the same way that we give a particular liberal consensus access, then if we don't do that, then effectively, where will those people go? We were pushing them to the edges. Now, I thought that would be an extreme fringe, but because of social media, it's become the mainstream now, has been pushed to the edges, as it were, and have created their own kind of, whether it be in America or here or other countries, creating their own media, and therefore bypassing the kind of the mainstream, as they call it, but the mainstream kind of media, the more objective media rather than subjective. I'm not saying that TV is totally wrong about all of this, but just think if we'd started thinking about that then we may not be in that situation, or we may be a different situation, I should say, than where we are now. Well, my point is the same with this. If you don't think about cultural diversity and the rapid changes that are happening over the next 10 to 15, 20 years in demographics, then if you don't start thinking about it now, it'll be the same as what we said all those years ago about people who haven't got necessarily a liberal take on life. Where will they go? I think the same thing will happen again. And it's almost like repeating itself. And I think it repeats itself because of the people with the same kind of thinking constantly making the decisions, and not necessarily making the decisions based on anything other than what they think is right, because they surround themselves in their own little echo chamber.
Looking at your non-broadcast experience as well, Aaqil, because obviously, you've been focused on diversity and ethics, and I'm going to come on to talk about diversity in the TV industry in a second, but you've been advising lots of different organisations, from Ofcom, Advertising Standards Authority. You're a professor of School of Media Arts at Bolton University. You also work with the Rugby Football League, the Sir Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, lots of different organisations that you're giving advice to, both inside the TV industry and wider. Looking at the TV industry then, how do you think the industry is approaching the issue of diversity right when it comes to not only representation on screen, but people that are working within it? I mean, are the broadcasters in the main getting it right? Or, because sometimes to me, I see some executions of strategy in this area that, that lots of organizations tie themselves in knots, really, where they're trying to do the right thing, but perhaps it's not being executed in the right way. I mean, what's your view? How is the UK TV industry dealing with diversity right now, and what should it be doing better?
Where do we start? I mean, look, I think it's up and down, isn't it? I mean, it's been better before. I definitely think it's been better before. And I think we have to question why it's not as good as it was before, really. And again, a lot of that might be due to some of the things I've already talked about the people who are making the decisions might be all thinking in the same kind of way, and they might be bringing their own particular cultural stereotypes and prejudices or unconscious biases to the table. There's a lot of that. I think there's an artificial hierarchy in diversity as well. The reality is people like me, we're the majority in terms of the minority communities in this country, yet I don't think we're the ones who people think about. Muslims, Pakistani, male, north of England, and it's the wrong kind of diversity for some people these days. But actually, Muslims, north of England, Midlands, that kind of thing, were the kind of like the big communities. So there was this kind of like almost like artificial hierarchy that's been created. And I think it has created a situation where some people basically think, you can be the wrong kind of diverse, right? For particular, what people think is diverse, or what they think are the kind of like people who may need to be helped or may need to be approached, etc. Now, the big thing for me is actually that if we're still, as an industry, failing spectacularly, and we are now, and I think we were failing not that badly for a while, but now we're failing spectacularly. If we are, then at what point do you sit there and say, how wrong have we got it? If we can't find the right kind of people, or if people who have certain skill sets and have been successful or whatever, suddenly fall out of favour or whatever, get cancelled or whatever you want to call it, or just can't get any work. And then we have these constant conversations about entry level. If that's the case, at what point do you turn around and say, you're not fit to do this yourself and it's going to be imposed on you? And I remember when I was first started working, there was a lot of work was going on about female representation in senior leadership, etc. And you know what? It changed telly, didn't it? And it changed it for the better, right? No matter what some of these oldies might say. Now, all of that kind of stuff, why haven't we seen some of that? Now, I remember when I was chairing the Creative Diversity Network commissioning group, whatever, we had an idea, and I remember I pitched it to every single CEO, DG, in British broadcasting, whereas I wanted to create, it was based on something I'd seen that Channel 4 had done when I was at Channel 4, which was a trainee commissioning editor scheme. It hadn't been the best one at Channel 4, but what we wanted to do was, and what we pitched was a pan-industry trainee commissioning editor scheme. The idea being that you would get people in, they would learn those kind of skills, and then they would go on and do something with that, whether it would be as a commissioner or getting jobs elsewhere. And that in itself, if we'd have carried on doing it properly rather than what ended up happening with various different broadcasters having various different reasons for why they wanted to do it and what they wanted to do, when you have that, you can get successes, and there have been successes as well. But you get those successes, but what you do is you can change the world, as it were. And so the question I have to ask is, why have we not managed to do more of that, or managed to progress people, or seen a more diverse order of people at the top table, etc.? It's because there's got to be a problem. If nothing goes wrong, right? If you basically fail and nothing happens, it doesn't affect your career, or it doesn't basically mean anything to anybody apart from lip service, because it has to be lip service because it's carried on for 30, 40 years, then the question has to be asked that actually maybe the broadcasters, not all of them, but maybe some of these broadcasters can't be trusted to do this. And again, this is me speaking of my own back, whatever. It's not on behalf of any kind of organisation, but I just find it quite interesting that when you look at the banking sector and all other kinds of sectors which are much more culturally diverse, it's because there's a business case for that. And again, going back to some of the stuff I've waffled on about demographic change and cultural diversity and audiences changing and etc. over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, across the whole of Western Europe. If you're not realising that now, then how are you expected to be any good at diversity as well? madness. If we build buildings in Leeds, or we build them in Manchester or whatever, or Birmingham or whatever, you name it, and if the office isn't full of people who come from that kind of area, as opposed to importing them in or whatever, and they may not, and it isn't full of the people who are from that cultural diverse background or whatever, from that particular geographical area we're talking about, then has it been a success? So I think it's the criteria that we set for what is success and failure that needs to change, and what that means in terms of punishment's the wrong word, but what that means in terms of what success and failure can mean to an individual, an organization, a project, or whatever it may be. Because, you can build a great building, but if that building doesn't reflect the community in that geographical area, then has it been a success? I don't know. That's my point about diversity. I think we're ticking lots of boxes, but if the same people are failing all the time, then at what point do we say that's actually not good enough? And from a business point of view, would you be thinking about all this stuff that we talk about? If this is happening now and on the horizon, if you're not ready for that, then you failed, right? And no business leader in any other area would be allowed to fail constantly, as we're allowing our leaders to fail constantly in our industry. And that's not me being really critical of people who are often friends as well, to be honest with you. It's a collective, and we throw ourselves into that mix, myself as well. It's a collective failure. We must be the most unluckiest industry on the planet, right? Because we try so hard, yet we don't get diversity right. At what point do we turn around and say, maybe we're not unlucky, maybe we're flawed, and we need to start thinking differently and start approaching and appreciating some of those voices which we don't want to hear, but they might be right.
You mentioned cancel culture earlier on, Aaqil. Do you think cancel culture is damaging the TV industry right now? I
think it is, tell you the truth. I'm not one for, I've gone on like a lot of us, I've gone on a journey. I'm a child of that, mid 80s, late 80s kind of politics of no platform, etc. But, gone on a journey many, many years ago, decades ago. And I think the problem with cancel culture today is often it gets referenced as about telling maybe right-wing voices or whatever. But I don't think it's that. I think it's a general point about, it goes back to that earlier point that was made about what do we consider to be the right kind of views or the right kind of opinions or the right kind of story or whatever, or the right kind of person or the right kind of diversity or whatever. I could go on, And that often means that views, people, etc., they're not given the same kind of access, or they're not in the same kind of conversations, or they're not able to project what they want to do. So what that means is that if you have a situation where, and it's very different to say cancel culture in publishing, for instance, right? That can really affect someone's ability to get their books out because nobody will publish them. There's a question about, if we want people to engage with programming in a world where people have real issues about authenticity, about fake news or whatever it is, then surely we have to be engaging with subjects that many of us might find uncomfortable. But engaging with them in the right way rather than engaging with them with a sneering way, or as the case might be sometimes when people have tried to do it in a cat-handed way where basically they may go too far and not basically balance things in some form or other. So I'm not saying that there's an easy answer to this, but the answer is that you have to do things properly. It's like the Charlie Hebdo conversation or any of the cartoons conversations that we had. By not talking about it, effectively, you're then giving in, right? You have to talk about a subject. Yeah. When we did the Inside the Mind of the Suicide Bomber and stuff like that, I remember going somewhere once and people stood up with their backs to me while I was talking about it. And I remember saying to them, you don't make peace with your friends. With the Cult of the Suicide Bomber, we made, I think it was like 6 episodes in the end, or 8 or 9, I can't remember now. But I remember the last one was, how do you defeat suicide bombing? And if you'd have said from day one, we're not making a program about suicide bombing, we're not giving these people the opportunity to speak because they're criminals and we shouldn't be doing that, then we wouldn't have gone through all the process and ended up with here's a strategy for defeating it in the future. When we talk about cancelling, I think you have to be brave about subjects and say, I will do this. I speak with many people who have opinions that I don't agree with. I commissioned the program with Tommy Robinson when he met Muslims for the first time. He ended up leaving the English Defence League and teaming up with some Muslim guys that we put him in touch with, right? Now, I don't want to take credit for any of that because, quite frankly, the whole thing ended up being a bit of a mess. But if I can't sit with Tommy Robinson and try and expose him to what a real Muslim is or take him to a mosque for the first time, then what's the point? That's surely a better program than just trying to say these guys are fast and they're horrible. Yeah, they might be, and they are probably. I'm not saying he is, but they are. They might be. But the fact of the matter is, isn't it better if you try and engage with the person and take him to a mosque for the first time, and then you have this situation where he then starts talking about them as being nice human beings, and then you introduce him to some Muslims that may have not necessarily the same views as his, but different views than he's ever heard before, and he's exposed to a different kind of thinking. That, to me, is better. I think cancelling any kind of conversation like that, not having people who think different like that, access to the airwaves, I think is suicide in the long run.
And now it's time for Story of the Week, where Aaqil gets to highlight the TV industry news that's caught his eye in the past 7 days. Aaqil, what's your Story of the Week?
Well, it's a radio one, but it's TV, if it makes any sense. And it was the whole thing about BBC local radio stations facing big cuts, yeah? So there's an idea being that, they're going to make less programs, bespoke programs for local communities. There'll be a breakfast show, afternoon, whatever, but there's going to be a lot more kind of sharing of programming across that particular mix. And the reason why you might say, what's that got to do with telly, mate? Is it's a bigger point for me, about actually what is public service broadcasting about. Many of us grew up in a world where the BBC was very London-centric, and ITV, or the regions like Granada or Tyne Tees, etc., they were the kind of people that used to that used to feel more connected. And over the years, as ITV's become this kind of like PLC, London-based kind of like entity, you've seen kind of like the BBC step into these areas, and local programming reflecting the differences in localities, etc., has become quite central for a lot of people. That's where they're getting a lot of their information from, particularly at a time when local newspapers, local radio struggling for advertising, and people purchasing the papers. Now, the thing for me on this story is, because of the freeze in the license fee and because of all sorts of other things, the BBC has got financial problems, right? And so what they do is they're taking it for their own decision. And again, speaking purely on a personal point of view here, I understand why they might make this decision, but it, for me, brings out this big thing, which is, what is the point of public service broadcasting if you're not reflecting what some of those communities might need? If they need that kind of programming, which is local to them, and they're not getting it anywhere else, and that's what they think they're getting from their license fee and why they want to pay a license fee, that makes you stand out differently from, say, any other kind of broadcaster. And the thing for me, which I just find quite amazing, is this, that, whether it's political interference or not, but having a license fee freeze and having the BBC have to take on, whether it's the cost of the World Service or pensioners' license fees and all the rest of it, the real term impact is, this has budgetary impact. And then what happens is we start to then see decisions like this. I wonder if decisions like this are the right decision in terms of making you stand out from other broadcasters, because you're taking away what is unique about you in many senses, actually delivering local programming, which gives new voices, which gives new artists access. I could go on. You take that away, and then suddenly you become the same as everyone else. That's what we become in danger of. That we're becoming. The danger for all of this is that it makes me worry about what public service broadcasting will be going forward, and it makes you then. It will make a lot of people question, how should public service broadcasting be paid for, and is the license fee ultimately the best way to do that? Because if the license fee isn't ultimately being paid for enough true public service broadcasting, then is it time to redress that? And I think that's what this story screams out to me.
Aaqil, now it's time to find out your hero of the week and who or what you're telling to get in the bin this week. So first of all, Hero of the week. Who's your hero of the week, Aaqil?
Stormzy for me. I don't know if you know about Stormzy investing again in putting his money where his mouth is again, and his time and his effort. And this is actually about football. He's part of a campaign to try and get more people involved in football management, etc., coaching, management, and all this stuff. And what I love about Stormzy, when there's not enough people publishing books from black authors, he'll set up a publishing company. He'll invest money. He knows that, that if you're going to get people at the top of the tables, sit at the top table sometimes, they've got to go to certain kind of universities. It puts his money on the table again to basically get people into those universities with bursaries. And on this one, just got me thinking, I kind of love the fact that this is a proper doer. This is a guy who doesn't need to do any of this, does he? Let's be honest. He doesn't need to do this, but he does it because he really believes in it. And it just gets me thinking, what would a Stormzy TV show or a Stormzy channel be? It would probably blow out of the water a lot of things that we kind of take for granted. And so going back to all that stuff we talked about with diversity and all the rest of it, all those people who just constantly fail and fail and fail, just take a leaf out of Stormzy's book. Man, the guy, if he decides he wants to do something, he does it. And the people around him, he brings in all sorts of different people, and they deliver change and they deliver real kind of impact. It's not just hey, here's a kind of an announcement, with me. This is what I'm going to do. And we're going to do all these great things. We're going to deliver all this great change, which I've had to endure for 30 years. He doesn't do that. He says, you know what? Isn't this a bit of a zeitgeisty thing? We had that report a couple of weeks ago about the lack of black managers in football, etc. But we've got all these players, but the coaching has gone up. He's getting involved in it because he probably thinks, this is a moment to do something about this. And it'll be a mental change, and we'll see that change. So that's what I'm saying, man. Stormzy is my hero of the week because he walks the walk. He just doesn't talk the talk.
All right. Okay. Stormzy, hero of the week there. And who is going in the bin?
Well, I don't think there could be anybody other than a combination of Matt Hancock. I know it's just Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock, I don't want to trivialize this, because a lot of people, including myself, lost loved ones to COVID. The fact of the matter is, I kind of the TV guy in me gets it, right? I get it. I'm no saint, right? I've done a lot of stuff and I get it why you would go after Matt Hancock. But, and it's a huge, big BUT here, but that is it the right time? Is it too early? And is there a danger that ITV may get themselves into some kind of toxic publicity? I know the mantra of all publicity is good publicity, but you remember the toxicity of the Shilpa Shetty thing with regards to Big Brother, kind of resulted in Big Brother being finished on Channel 4. I know I was there at the time. And I also remember Kevin Ligo, when we were at Channel 4, once talking to me about I'd been given access to this Sikh play. It was called Beshti, which was it was riots going, people were stopping the performance happening in Birmingham at the time because they're saying it was anti-Sikh, etc. I got access to the play. I remember speaking to Kevin about it, and he said, "Is it any good?" I said, "I don't particularly think it's that great myself, to tell you the truth." And he said, "We shouldn't do it because we shouldn't just do it for the sake of it if it's not very good." Well, nothing I've seen of Matt Hancock in the last few years would suggest to me that he is probably worth that money as a performer. It's only worth that money for the publicity and the eyeballs that they're going to get. And so for me, that's my bin it in the week, because I'm just not convinced that it's been done for the right reasons. And I'm not convinced, putting the TV man to one side, I'm not convinced that right now it's the right time to be trying to have Matt Hancock as a lovable rogue when there are many people who don't think about him and the government that he represented as being lovable rogues.
Yeah. And for anybody outside the UK who is not aware of Matt Hancock, he's a British politician who served as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care during COVID, which was a fairly difficult task, but there were various incidents through his tenure, and also one or two that led to his dismissal. He's going to be in I'm a Celebrity, which is taking place in Australia right now, reportedly being paid £400,000. But he's also a serving member of Parliament, so he has got constituents who are relying on him to deal with cost of living crisis in their constituency and what have you, whereas he's trousering a reported 400 grand and flying over to Australia and becoming a celebrity.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. And you don't give that money out unless, you get a return. And the return will be clickbait, and it's worked in that sense. I get that. There'll be lots of people thinking that was the right thing to do. And there's a part of me that thinks it was as well. But this week, the reason why I'd have him in the bin is because I just think for a lot of people, sometimes you can get it wrong, can't you? The mood music. When you've got cabinet ministers in this particular government saying that it's outrageous and inappropriate, I question it. And it's a very brave move for ITV as well. Very, very brave for ITV because, this is a very, very mainstream show, a very family-friendly show as well in many respects. Yeah. And from an advertising point of view, it'd be really interesting to look back on this in a year's time to see what the impact of it all was.
Yeah, and a risky move for Mr. Hancock as well. So we'll see how that all plays out. It could be an interesting case study in the months to come, as we say, to look at. Aaqil, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast. It's been fascinating. I mean, I didn't even delve into lots of different things about your career, which I'd love to chat about. So maybe you'll come on and have a chat again at some point in the future.
Would love to.
Aaqil, thanks for coming on TellyCast, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Big soon.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. Just a reminder that we've moved the date of the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios, to the 30th of November, still at the BFI South Bank, and that's due to the tube strike. All tickets remain valid for the new date. And there are still some tickets left, and you can buy these at telecast.com/events. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next week, stay safe